Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion on ecosystem markets. My name is Jean Brokish, and it is my sincere privilege to welcome you all today. I'm the Midwest Program Manager for American Farmland Trust, and I am joined today by my co-host, Dr. Emily Bruner, the Midwest Science Director. Beth Frazier is another member of American Farmland Trust staff who's helping us with the technical issues. So just before we get started, a little bit about American Farmland Trust. It's a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. American Farmland Trust is a founding member of the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, or ISAP. This group of 14 organizations works together to improve soil health and reduce nutrient loss from Illinois farms. And really, our work in Illinois would not be possible without the partnership like this. And I'd like to thank members of ISAP for helping plan today's event, and also to give a special recognition to Megan Baskerville from the Nature Conservancy for her assistance behind the scenes. Megan has done a great job stitching together our slide deck, and will keep things moving for us today. Further, this forum would not be possible without the collaboration and support from our partner organizations from Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, and Wisconsin. As we were planning this event, we recognized the importance of this topic to the Midwest region and really benefited from the different perspectives and ideas brought forth by these organizations. And because of this collaboration, we've been able to reach a larger audience and secure representation from 4 prominent carbon and ecosystem market entities. We'll be joined today by Alden Donnelly from Nori, Carrie Hernandez from Indigo Ag, Adam Keel from the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, and Caroline Wade from Ecosystem Services Market Consortium. And we're happy, of course, that you've joined us too. More than 1,600 people have registered for today's webinar. And in the room, we have farmers, loan officers, agronomists, researchers, and a wide variety of professionals working in agriculture and conservation. And there are a lot of questions on ecosystem markets right now. It seems to be a field that is attracting a lot of attention. And we've set aside the last half of today's webinar for Q&A with our presenters, where we hope to address some key questions received both through the registration process and those that come up during today's presentations. So we encourage you to let us know what you want to know by using the question bar to ask questions that come up anytime during today's webinar. And you should have a dashboard that looks similar to the one shown on the screen, and the yellow arrow highlights where the question bar is. You can also use that question bar to alert staff of any tech issues you might be having, and we'll address those. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Jean. And thanks again for everybody for joining us today. Again, we've just been really overwhelmed by the level of interest and support that we've received in organizing this event. We're super grateful to all of our partners and the featured presenters for their time and dedication behind the scenes. Essentially, there's a lot of work that went into making sure this webinar is as informative as possible. And we kind of built around 3 different strategies as our program plan evolved. So essentially, those strategies were kind of built around. We reached out to our partner networks to curate some questions to really figure out, kind of what was on the top of everyone's mind, what everybody really wanted to know. We then took these questions straight to our presenting entities and asked them directly and summarized their responses. We put that into a nice side-by-side comparison table, which is actually linked in the reminder email that all registrants received today. So I'd encourage you to dig that reminder email out and click that link, because the resource is linked there. And that kind of summarizes a lot of the information and prep work that we put into this presentation and webinar today. And then we also, within our planning committee, developed a hypothetical scenario that we thought would hopefully help to contextualize some of the information. And we've asked all the presenters to kind of walk through that hypothetical scenario. So maybe again, that can kind of highlight, where these different programs differ and what the experience would look like for a farmer. So I'm just going to use these next few minutes really quickly to kind of set the stage based off of what we've discovered as we've put these together. And then, yeah, I just also want to as I'm setting the stage, I also want to just kind of have a disclaimer out there, that all the partners, we worked, most of us in conservation space, technical assistance space for a really long time. And so we really want to make sure that none of this comes across that any of us are particularly endorsing these new opportunities or encouraging them. We just want to help farmers kind of navigate and help our larger ag community at large kind of navigate some of these and figure out if they are indeed right for their farm or their situation. And so in setting the stage, right, we not only did we put our work on the front end to try to curate our questions and our scenario and use it to inform the content today, but we also dug through the hundreds of questions that we received during registration. And a lot of both practitioner questions, farmer questions, and conservation practitioners were kind of almost geared towards this very kind of practice specific mindset. Like, for example, I had several farmers say, well, if I enroll in a market, can I still use tillage? And so we just wanted to make sure we set this up for people to kind of be on that same wavelength, right? That even though a lot of the practices that we typically incentivize via traditional cost share and financial assistance programs generally provide the greatest ecosystem benefits, when we look at a market approach, the payments are generated via the outcomes of those practices and aren't necessarily practice specific. And so I just kind of threw up here a visual of an example of some outcomes that we here at AFT had quantified for Illinois state cover crop program, just to, again, kind of set us in that mindset and have that visual of not just acres enrolled in a program, but also, the soil carbon storage, the net greenhouse gas emission in metric ton of CO2 equivalents, which is how generally markets are evaluating these things. And then also the water quality improvements as terms of pounds of pollutant reduction. And keeping in mind when we're quantifying, we're doing that against a baseline. So, where you would be with your current management versus where you would be with additional practices implemented and how that's going to improve and provide those benefits and those services against that baseline of current management. Next slide, please. So again, we also, in that resource document that went out, we do have some tools and some reports featured that can also help. A lot of our conservation practitioners were like, well, how do I even begin to help my farmers start to navigate some of these opportunities? Where do I even enter into the conversation? And so there are tools that can help just get a general planning idea of what you could expect as far as greenhouse gas reduction, CO2e, carbon dioxide equivalents on a per acre, per practice basis. We also, AFT has the CARPE tool, which kind of scales up that USDA Colorado State Common Planner tool, which is a per acre, per year basis, and scales it up to be able to kind of do planning a little bit more regionally. And then we also have a couple of reports that provide applications of these. We also just have this wonderful economic estimation or outcomes estimation tools report that came out. So again, depending on what level and where and what interest you have in moving, from practices to outcomes, there are a plethora of tools and resources available. And I would encourage you to, again, look at that resource document that we developed, because we have some featured, and that's a great starting point to dig in as much or as little as you would really like to do. Next slide, please. So again, in that resource document, the whole second page is that side-by-side comparison of some of the different featured presenters that we have today. And I just kind of, it's a lot of really basic information, and some of it, may or may not be new, but I just kind of want to call attention to the fact that, kind of having it in this distilled space provides that easy, so you can make a decision as you're planning and as you're thinking through things, what level of commitment am I on an annual commitment? Am I comfortable with that? Or do I want to go more long-term? Who's going to be the end buyer? What kind of, level of complexity of outcome estimation and verification is going to be required? And just getting ourselves in kind of the mindset of thinking through that and kind of navigating what market opportunity, if applicable, would be the best for your particular operation. Next slide, please. And so to kind of wrap that all up, to give us a little bit of overview of how we kind of enter some of this new opportunity space, I kind of put together this thinking, if we're going to approach a typical conservation practice, planning scenario, that the general goal of the outset of the planning is still the same, right? What is your goal? What do you want to achieve? How do you want to change your management practice to essentially affect what your resource concern or your goal for your own particular operation is? Only now, during that planning stage, you might want to look at some of those resource tools and begin to think more about, okay, well, what kind of outcomes would those generate? And how can I begin to plan to quantify for those and keep those in mind as you move towards kind of that field scale experimentation, practice implementation phase, where typically maybe, it would make more sense to have, some of that traditional cost share dollar to help ease those transitions. And then depending on how far you're going to go and what level of commitment you're going to have in the future, as far as if you're going to really, go whole hog, if you will, and make those farm scale management changes, could then decide, do you enter into a market, that on an annual basis that then again you could do alongside with some of that kind of field scale experimenting, or are you comfortable going a longer term commitment with, maybe larger or more complex verification components? And at that point, you might want to wait, and it might make more sense to include that when you're ready and comfortable to really make farm scale management changes. So I hope that helped provide just a little bit of context, because there's so many different terms and new ideas floating around in the market space. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump really quickly into that farmer scenario that we developed. We hope that this was simplistic enough, but still representative of what maybe a typical Midwest farmer would be looking at. So, 1,000 acres, corn, soybean farmer. Since 2008, they've been using 2 tillage passes ahead of corn, but they've been no-tilling their soy. They own 500 acres, they rent 500. And so since 2018, they've been experimenting with cover crops on a 20-acre field, but then they're ready to move into, some more of those large scale management changes. And so in 2021, they're going to go ahead and ramp up their cover crops to that full 500 owned acres. And then in 2022, they're going to go all 1,000 acres into no-till corn. And then in 2023, they're going to add 500 additional acres on their rented ground of cover crops. Next slide. So this is just kind of in tabular format for our folks who aren't as visual, to get an idea of that scenario, again, with just, the new practices highlighted there in green and yellow. And, we're just really looking forward to our presenters walking us through this as part of their presentations. We've given them 12 minutes. We're going to try to keep things moving along so everybody gets a good and equal opportunity to talk about how these different programs differ. And then we'll save the Q&A towards the end and talk a little bit more about how that'll run when we get there. So with that, I'm super excited. Thanks again, and here we go.
Thanks, Emily. Really great to help set the stage for us with some background information on these incentives, as well as reminding us of the scenario so that the audience can kind of get in the space of what these programs look like from a farmer perspective. So our first presenter today is Alden Donnelly with Nori. Alden has been a small business developer and consultant for over 40 years, and in the 1990s, she started to work on market-driven strategies to reduce atmospheric carbon concentrations. Alden brokered the first agreement to finance carbon sequestration in agricultural soils. So we are has lots of information to share with us. So thank you for joining us today, Alden.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor, and I hate going first, so I'm holding that against you. Let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to spend very much of my 12 minutes talking about Nori, because I hope that anybody watching who is interested after today will reach out to us to learn more about what Nori does and how Nori does it. And please feel free to just jump to the bottom of this page and note that when you want to know more, ask any questions, whether it's about enrolling in Nori or even just getting a copy of this slide deck. Just pop off an email to hello.nori.com, and our wonderful support staff will get back to you no matter what you're asking for, or no matter what you'd like to know. So let's move on from there. Before I go on to about markets, I think it's important to start with maybe putting, at least from our perspective, some definitions on the table, because we seem to be calling a lot of things markets that at least we're not comfortable calling markets. There are a number of registries or programs in existence that provide very important services. And the registries that we're thinking of include, but aren't limited to, the Climate Action Reserve, the Vera VCS registry, the American Carbon Registry, the California Air Resources Board Offset Program. And I'm going to call those all registries or programs. And what they really are certification agencies. They are agencies or bodies who have developed protocols or methods which a farmer would have to comply with in both the process of developing a plan that is reviewable to sequester carbon or reduce emissions. The methodologies say how your plan has to be validated by a third party before the registry will accept it as certified to their standard. The data that you supply, any model or include in any formulas to estimate your emissions and carbon sequestration baselines and incremental improvements have to be verified by a third party, and all of the data that you use has to be regularly verified. And these agencies maintain these very stringent standards, and when you prove on regular cycles that you've complied with their certification standards, they maintain a public registry and they issue credits into an account, a project owner's account. In these registries, most of the time, not all of the time, the account owners, the project owners, are big corporate aggregators. And the reason is typically participating in this process and getting registered in these programs is very costly, and the numbers just don't work for even for farmers who farm even 3,000 acres, let alone 150 acres. So in these registries, the other thing in these registries is that small buyers of credits cannot buy credits through these registries because of a whole bunch of different reasons. The buyers of small volumes of credits can only buy through a broker. And the net result of those two sides of these registries is that because you have to be supplied through an aggregator most of the time, and you can't buy directly, typically historically across all sectors, if and when buyers are paying $15 to $20 per credit, historically that is translated into between 73 cents and $2 per credit, making its way to the landowner, the farmer, over time. So Nori's goal was to say, wait a second, let's start with an efficient standard, find a way to generate high quality credits that does not involve all that overhead, to create a true marketplace where small suppliers and buyers can participate with equal market power to large aggregators. That was our first goal. The second goal was to actually have what we call true price discovery. So if you register your project in these programs or registries, and a buyer and a supplier see that they might like to do a transaction, it operates like Craigslist. You click on the contact information for the other side, and then you go do a deal off the registry, and who paid what for how much is not publicly reported. So it's not possible for suppliers and buyers to track what's happening in these registries and get a sense of what's happening in terms of price and demand. So we also wanted to be creating a market that, when robust and vibrant, is creating that discovery, that option for you to see what's happening in the market before you decide what price to attach to your supply or how much you're willing to pay for a supply of credits. I should say we're early stage, we're a startup. Less than 30,000 credits have been sold and paid for over our platform to date. But to date, when buyers have paid on average between 17 and 18 or 16 and $18 per credit, after we deduct our registry transaction fees, the fees to cover our costs, and after we deduct whatever the farmer has to pay third-party verifiers to meet our verification standard, typically $12 to $14 out of that 16 to 18 has made it into the farmer's pocket. So we're kind of happy. It's early stage, it's anecdotal evidence, but we seem to be achieving our goals of creating a market that is clearing with more money getting into the farmer's pocket. Can I go to the next slide, please? So I just wanted to say here, and I'm going to focus on the Climate Action Reserve or CAR registry, primarily because Indigo is going to be following me in this presentation, and Indigo is in this marketplace and aggregator. So when you sign a contract with Indigo, you're committing to basically transfer title to your capacity to deliver ecosystem services, and the credits that CAR might issue to your project are issued directly to Indigo. So Indigo is playing an important role in that marketplace, in that they become the project owner and aggregator, and the CAR marketplace is really designed primarily to work that way. And one of the things you'll see if you look at the CAR marketplace is that the registry relies for its own revenues on fees and one-time and annually recurring fees that must be paid whether or not any credits ever sell. And much of those that payment is paid up front. And this does not even include verification and project validation costs that must be borne up front before you can get a project registered. So the fee system favors projects controlled by large aggregators over individual one-time projects. So it costs for 500 acres, it costs Indigo Ag less in the fee structure to register, be an aggregator and register 2 projects than it would for each of those project owners, landowners, to register independently. And as I said, the fee structure is upfront. It makes it not possible for the small operators or a cooperative or collaborative of a limited number of small operators to make a return on direct participation in this marketplace. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's just what it is. And then when you're thinking about markets, Indigo Ag, Blue Source, or others are aggregators who are well suited to take you through this process. And I'll leave it to them to argue why they would prefer to take you through this process than, say, the alternative, which is the Nori marketplace. Next slide. I'm just mentioning here that cost differential in the prior slide does not include the cost of third-party validation, project planning validation verification. Just want to say that today we perceive we have not compromised the standard for verification in any way, and verification in our marketplace, again, small volume, still anecdotal evidence, but seems to be costing 5 to 10 times less per ton that's verified, or credit that's verified in our marketplace than in the traditional registry comparison. Next slide. So I'm going to go through the next 3 slides quickly. What we did was take the 500 of the 1,000 acres of the case study that Emily showed you, and basically just for ease, and found some fields in Nebraska that have, to the best of our knowledge, cropping and soil treatment history and tillage history, and current practices that are more or less consistent with the case study that Emily showed us. And so I'm just showing you in our system, here's what the map of the fields look like. We have a data template. When we know the location of the fields, we a data template showing history and current, and creating the opportunity for the grower to introduce future practices into the template is automatically generated, and the grower can fix the data in it that looks wrong. And but you start with a pre-filled data template. And when you move on to the next slide, once you've ticked off approval of the data template, we generate 2 estimates for you. One is the number of NRTs. Nori's credit is called an NRT, Nori carbon removal ton. Grandfathered NRTs that we expect you will qualify for if you elect to proceed to enroll your project in our marketplace. Grandfathering is if there's verifiable data available to us that the landowner can make available to us, we will issue credits for up to 5 years of past carbon sequestration to growers who have adopted new practices reasonably likely to increase soil organic carbon stocks after December 31st, 2009. So a maximum of 5 years of grandfathered NRTs for practices that might have been new practices as far back as 2010. And in this case, for those 500 acres in Nebraska, the grandfathered NRT generation potential is 699. And we also include a projection that tells you our best, and it's based on what you put in as assumptions about future practices, our best estimate of how many tons per year of incremental NRT credits you might get over the next 10 years. With that information, you can decide to enroll in our marketplace or not. I'm going to go to the next slide and try to be really quick. I want you to, it's really complicated. Please feel free to follow up, but this is what I wanted you to see. If you take exactly the same acres, exactly the same project, and you're using exactly the same quantification method, and look at what is the resulting issuance of credits that are available to you or your aggregator, Indigo Ag or Blue Source, to sell for this project. If you enroll in the Nori marketplace, your saleable credits are the numbers on the bottom line of this table. And if Indigo is using the Climate Action Registry credit issuance procedures, there are 2 options. Your marketable credits are either of the next 2 lines up on that table. So the question that I want you to start asking yourselves is, how much more per ton do you have to get paid to make it a good idea to go through the CAR registry instead of Nori? I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Alden. I was about to ask you to leave it there. It's a great question, and good to now be switching over to Carrie Hernandez with Indigo Ag. We'll put our market spotlight on Indigo Ag and have Carrie join us. Can turn her camera on, great, while I do the introduction. Carrie is the Global Head of Carbon Operations and Offer Marketing for Indigo Ag, where she leads operations strategy, grower experience strategy, offer marketing, product launch, ag partnerships, and operations management. So thank you, Carrie, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Jean, very much for having me, and thanks to everybody who's joining. Hopefully this will be a very informative session for everyone. So good afternoon, let's jump in. I'll just start by saying that at Indigo, we really believe that carbon farming could be transformative for farm economics. So we've designed our program to help you capture that potential upside in as many ways as possible. So I will spend the time today walking you through what that looks like. Next slide, please. So a very quick overview. The Indigo Carbon Program is all about bringing cutting-edge science and digital technologies to support you in adding beneficial farming practices to generate carbon credits that adhere to the highest external quality standards available. In addition to these high-quality credits, our program helps you improve the health of your soil and the value of your land over time. Next slide, please. So I like to start back a little bit. When we launched Indigo Carbon in 2019, we began by looking at other carbon credit markets to understand what works and what doesn't. And one example that we took a few really important lessons from was the Chicago Climate Exchange, which some of you might be familiar with, which got off to a great start and then fizzled. The two core problems that we identified with the ag credits that really caught our attention is one, they were insufficiently rigorous standards that were being used for those ag carbon credits. And two is there was a lack of sustained demand. So when we created our program, we set out to solve those two problems directly. Next slide, please. So we begin with the standards. We were teaming up with the Climate Action Reserve and Verra to develop carbon accounting rules for agriculture. These organizations are two of the world's leading standard-setting bodies for carbon projects of all kinds: forestry, industrial emissions, other kinds of projects around the world. Both have a proven record and set a high bar for offset quality based on both domestic and international best practices. We expect that the stamp of these registries will be a lot like the USDA organic stamp in a grocery store. Buyers who see that stamp are willing to pay more for products because they trust it, they have confidence that those independent and high quality standards have been met. Next slide, please. Now, this is important because the market is already showing a growing willingness to pay for high quality carbon credits. And demand is on the rise and supply is slow to catch up. So with over 30% of Fortune 500 companies making climate neutrality commitments, more and more are going to be looking for carbon offsets to be a part of their plan to get there. In case you can't read the quote on the bottom, I know some of this text is a little small. This is the Boston Consulting Group already stating publicly that they expect to be paying $35 in a few more years per credit and as much as $80 per credit by the end of the decade. Now, as these prices go higher, the stakes become higher, and the transparency and the quality that these registries provide will only become more important in the sale of these carbon credits. So just like you would with any other commodity market, we are anchoring on demand to understand how this drives and can create a robust and sustainable program. Next slide, please. So speaking of demand and carbon credit sales, this is a snapshot of the companies who have already pre-ordered carbon credits from Indigo farmers. You'll notice in the bottom, on the left-hand side, BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, is on here again. This is the company who said they expect to pay up to $80 per credit by the end of the decade, and they are already an Indigo Carbon committed buyer because they value these standards that we are using to structure our program. So with this list alone, our first year credits are already sold out. So even with hundreds of farmers on track to get paid, we have room for at least hundreds more, hopefully thousands more. So let's talk about how you too can be one of the farmers on track to getting paid. Next slide, please. So the most basic requirement to generate carbon credits is adding new carbon farming practices. We've listed some of the big categories here: planting cover crops, reducing tillage, rotating crops, rebalancing inputs, but there's a long list of specific practices that qualify within these practice categories. Next slide, please. So in addition to the revenue from the carbon credits, farmers see other benefits too all the time from these practices. These agronomic benefits include things like increased water infiltration, which leads to improved drought tolerance, improved weed management by keeping the ground covered and biologically active, and the list goes on. You see all kinds of examples of agronomic benefits and overall profitability impacts, both from increasing your revenue and helping to manage the cost side of the equation. So without going into too much detail here, let's talk about what to expect in the program. So these are your basic steps from left to right. The blue parts are what the grower does, the gray parts are what Indigo does. For a grower, it goes like this. Sign up using our web platform, plan the carbon farming practices you'll implement, add those practices, harvest your crop, and hand it over to Indigo. Indigo's role in turn to use our technology to do the legwork that turns that management information you've shared into high quality carbon credits so that you can focus on farming. We come back to you at the end when it's time to pay you. So participation here is in Indigo Carbon is free to growers. There are no purchase requirements. We account for all of the costs that happen in that gray zone. We take a fee from the sale of the credit from the buyer, and we never charge the grower for their participation. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at your specific journey. It looks like you are a corn soy grower on 1,000 acres of half rented ground and half owned. The good news is, as long as you have control over the operating decisions on the full 1,000 acres, you can enroll it all, whether you rent or you own. Seeing as you have a pretty good plan here, we're going to go ahead and assume that you do, and you're putting all 1,000 acres into our program. Next slide, please. Now we know there's a lot more that comes underneath this plan. Your farm is unique, but so is each field that you farm. And our goal at Indigo is to create a customized experience for all growers, and with us there to help you succeed along the way. So let's see what that might look like for you in this case. Next slide, please. Good. So the first step is signing up on our web platform. It takes only a few minutes to create an account, and it's free. Then, as you're thinking about which fields you'd like to consider for the program, you can start recording that in the platform, making enrollment very simple once you finalize your field selection. And now that you've selected your fields to enroll, which could be one field, could be 100 fields, it's time to start planning. Next slide. We have a number of support resources at Indigo to help this planning go smoothly, such as our agronomy team. In your case, you might want to connect with Justin and Josh, shown here, who are our Illinois agronomists. And if any of you are Twitter users, feel free to take down their Twitter handles listed here, Justin_agronomy and agronomist24_7, or Justin and Josh. They are regularly tweeting from the field and would love for you to follow along and join in. Next slide, please. Now we get to making changes. The first time you make a practice change, it's like planting your carbon crop, right? So in this case, you were originally going to plant a cereal rye cover, but after speaking with Justin and Josh, you're now considering planting 2 different blends ahead of the beans and the corn, respectively. You also had a great discussion about interseeding, and you identified some opportunities to reduce fertilizer use. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide the path that you want to take, but now you have a few more options to be able to decide what is right for each of those fields that you're working with. Next slide, please. Next up is harvest. For your carbon crop, we think of it as a digital harvest rather than a physical harvest. This is a time when you share management records to show the changes that you've made. The good news is carbon harvest season happens in the winter months, so it shouldn't get in the way of farming the rest of the year. You can see on the right-hand side here, Morgan and Todd from our customer success team are available to help if you have any questions. You can always chat with them directly from your carbon account. And you'll also note that Todd is a fellow Illinois corn and soy grower. So you might have a few more things in common with him too there. Next slide, please. Now, the question everyone is waiting for, what kinds of yields from my carbon crop should I expect? And I'll say that depends on 2 things. 1 is the practice changes you ended up making, and 2 is the price of the carbon credits. In this chart, we're showing a few different scenarios over 5 years, which is our starting contract period. So the first one is that grayish black line toward the bottom, which is the original plan. If you had followed that plan, you would have earned just shy of about $17,000 over the next 5 years. But if you had followed the plan you put together with Justin and Josh, you you'd be set up to earn over $60,000. And finally, the red line on here shows the extra potential from an increased credit price, which is what we expect will happen. In this example, we used a $35 payment rate, and in that case, that would bring your total to about $145,000 over the course of these 5 years. Now, I can't tell you what the price will be, but our hope is that a grower who joins our program, thinking the black line looks pretty good, you're coming in with a plan and you're ready to go. We hope that farmer is actually set up to achieve success that might actually look a little bit more like the red line once we bring in all of the other benefits and this increasing price over time. So this is the magic of the Indigo Carbon Program. We have built a technology system and an expert team that come together to help you maximize your carbon credits, enable you to participate in future price upside, make sure you stay in charge of your decisions, and let you reap the agronomic benefits and overall profit impacts. Next slide, please. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can create a free account at indigoag.com/FFTF, that is Farming for the Future, or join one of our upcoming webinars. We hope to count many of you as our carbon farming partners well into the future. And I'll just say thank you all very much for your time and attention this morning, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions at the end of the session. Back to you, Jean.
Thanks, Carrie. Really great, and I appreciate getting through those very clear slides for us. Next, we'll turn it over to Adam Keel with the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. Adam is the Executive Vice President of Ag Outcomes, which is a subsidiary of the Iowa Soybean Association. He has over 20 years of experience in the field and held a prior role as Director of Conservation for the Iowa Soybean Association. Adam grew up on a family farm near Decorah, Iowa, and earned a Bachelor of Science in Geography from the University of Iowa in Iowa City. So thank you, Adam, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the interest from so many people. I talk to a lot of farmers, obviously, and this is a hot topic, so the timing of this presentation couldn't be better. So let's dive right in. So if we go to the next slide. All right, so just a little bit of background about the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, kind of starting at the bottom of the slide. As was indicated in the introduction, there's kind of two partners working together here, Ag Outcomes, which is a subsidiary of the Iowa Soybean Association, and Reharvest Partners, which is a financial impact investing firm out of DC. So we work together to bring financial solutions to farmers. And what we try to do through the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is provide financial benefit to farmers who implement new conservation practices to cost effectively sequester carbon and improve water quality and other outcomes. So what's unique about what we're doing here with the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is we're bringing a higher value proposition to farmers for the multiple benefits that are produced from the same practices that Carrie talked about so well, cover crops, reduced tillage, input management, those kind of things. So that's the key for what we're doing. And then we sell those outcomes, the carbon outcomes and the water quality outcomes, to both public and private entities that benefit from them. And it's that stacking of those beneficiaries for both water and carbon that allow us to do what we do with the farmers that we work with. Next slide, please. So I got a couple slides here talking about just some of the basics about our program and what farmers probably should know about us if you're thinking about enrolling in the areas that we are seeking farmers. So as I mentioned off the start, we're really looking to pay farmers for both water quality and carbon. Again, that's a higher value proposition for farmers. We have no acre minimum or maximum enrollment. We don't have a look back period. Nori and Indigo, I think, both talked about the potential for a look back period. We are only able to pay for new practices, which we think is a standard that probably is going to be in the market moving forward. We don't allow stacking with other government or other ecosystem service programs. That may seem obvious to some, but maybe not to others. So we don't allow enrollment in our program and Nori at the same time, for example. When it comes to data, we require 2 years of historical crop data, crop operational data, and 2 years of future operational data That's kind of a minimum threshold. If there's a longer crop rotation than 2 years, we would require data for the full length of whatever the rotation happens to be. Next slide. Yeah, some other things that are unique about what we do right now, we're operating with 1-year contracts that are renewed annually. One of the things that we don't want to get into is promising farmers a 10 or a 20-year payment commitment when we don't have our buyers lined up to purchase those outcomes. So when we commit to a farmer through a contract, we already have a buyer secured for the product that they're going to produce. So that it's carbon, we have a carbon buyer under contract that's going to purchase everything that a farmer produces, as well as the water quality. We're not speculating here on the market, which we hope grows, as Carrie described, but we are really committed to providing farmers with outcome payments that we have secured and under contract. The key is that annual renewal period. That's an opportunity for farmers to re-enroll, but also increase acres or add practices. So we kind of level up the payment each year. There are no quantification or verification costs of the farmer. So when it comes to doing field checks, soil and water sampling, and remote sensing that we do as part of verification, there's no cost to the farmer for that, those activities. As I note there, we do provide free agronomic and conservation technical assistance through our network of conservation agronomists that we have in the field. And that's a feature that we really want to put an emphasis on. We really want to build strong relationships with farmers beyond the fields that are enrolled and talk about things that could be added to or done differently to produce a higher value proposition for farmers. And lastly, we don't have any customer requirements, so you don't have to belong to any association or be a member or be a customer of ours to participate. And lastly, we don't try to sell farmers any other product or service. And I think that's key, that this is the only business that we're in, is providing payment to farmers for the generation of environmental outcomes and then selling those outcomes to our beneficiary customers. Next slide. So where do we work? Because we line up our buyers in advance before we work with farmers, we're a little more selective in where we work. And I think that's to the advantage of farmers, because if a farmer produces something from us or with us, they know that they will be paid for that outcome. So currently we work across Iowa. You can see there the green counties that we have enrollment open currently. We'll be opening enrollment in parts of Illinois and Ohio starting March 1st, and we'll also be adding additional areas to be announced very soon. So the question on everybody's mind, again, is what's the payment potential? And the way that we work, we have a payment range of $15 to $40 per acre, and that's dependent or calibrated to the level of outcomes that are produced. So, for example, the more carbon and water quality outcomes that are produced from those practice changes in the field, the higher you're going to get on that payment scale. And that's all known before you enter into an agreement, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. Enrollment is conducted through an online platform that we have, and our conservation agronomists can help farmers through that process. And that enrollment platform can be found at theoutcomesfund.com. Next slide. All right, now let's get into the details about the sample farm, now that we kind of have a basic understanding of what the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is. So what's eligible? And again, how we view this, it's a yearly enrollment process. So I looked at what was changing in 2021, and I want to focus on that to start with. So in the scenario, there's 420 acres of new cover crop that's being added in crop year 2021. So those are the eligible acres that could be enrolled right now. And we'll get to future enrollment here in a second, but let's go through the enrollment process for those 420 acres. The farmer would, as I mentioned, enroll through our enrollment platform, and we need shapefiles or field boundaries. Either they can be uploaded or drawn, and then we need operational data. And I will mention, I think this is probably true for the other platforms as well. The sample data that we got from folks ahead of time, that's just a sample of the required data that is needed. There's additional operational data about fertilizer application rates and timing, planting and harvest times, in addition to what was provided about tillage and cover crops. So just know that there's going to be additional data requirements regarded to operations in the field. The way that I look at it, anytime a piece of equipment enters a field and does an activity, that operation would need to be entered. And I speculate that's true for the other enrollment platforms as well that you heard from and will hear from. So once that data is received, and as I mentioned, enrollment is open in Iowa right now and will be open in Illinois and other states soon. That data is run through two models, and that helps us predict what the estimated environmental benefits will be for both carbon and water. We'll use those estimated outcomes to calibrate a payment specific to your operation. For this particular scenario of the 420 acres of cover crop, I conservatively estimated $25 per acre. Again, would need that additional operational data to get a fine-tuned payment. And I wouldn't be surprised if that payment is higher. But I just wanted to be conservative and not overestimate what the potential payment is. But $25 is a pretty safe bet for being on the low end of where things are at. And again, a portion of that is for carbon, and a portion of that is for the water quality outcomes that result from the activities in the field, and specifically this 420 acres of cover crop. Next slide. So the offer is now in the hands of the farmer, and let's just assume for the sake of this exercise that you decided to sign up and execute that contract. When the contract is signed, we would initiate payment of half of what is due for that crop year. And this is another unique thing, and as I mentioned, our financial partner here, Reharvest Partners, really helps us establish both a financial solution as well as an environmental outcome solution here. So we're kind of trying to benefit farmers as much as we can, knowing that some of these practices cost money to get off the ground. So when you sign a contract, and let's just say that's in mid-March, payment would be initiated for approximately 50% of what's due. In this case, a little over $5,000 using the conservative estimate. And then as the crop year goes on, we would come out, conduct field visits, talk about the practices, do some randomized soil and water sampling, do also some remote sensing throughout the year. And that would ensure our verification and monitoring is meeting the standards of the verification protocols that we've established. And then assuming that a farmer meets all of those standards and does things per the contract, the other half of the payment would be made at the end of the crop year. So payment is made on an annual basis, and so long as you decide to re-enroll, that payment continues. So let's talk about re-enrollment for the last 30 seconds here. Next January, you could re-enroll the same 420 acres, and we hope that the farmer would do so. At that time, you could also enroll those additional acres that are seeing new conservation practices for the first time in 2022. So kind of there's opportunities for increased payment, increased acres as time goes on. So hopefully you can understand kind of what's eligible now and then what would be eligible as time goes on. So that's kind of an overview of the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. If we go to the last slide. You can go to theoutcomesfund.com to find our contact information, enroll, find more information. So again, looking forward to the Q&A, but it's a little overview of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. This is really informative and great presentation there. Our last, or I guess our fourth and final market spotlight is on Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, which is a little bit of a mouthful, Caroline. So I guess ESMC for short. Caroline Wade is the program director at ESMC, where she provides leadership and coordination to guide research, development, demonstration, and deployment of cost-effective and scalable technologies. She was previously the Ag Program Director for the Illinois chapter of the Nature Conservancy and worked for the Illinois Corn Growers Association, where she served as the Nutrient Watershed Manager. So thank you, Caroline, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jean. I am really excited to be coming back to my roots a little bit here in Illinois and reconnecting with ISAP. So thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everyone for participating in really this great session so far. So ESMC, we are a mission-driven organization really striving to advance ecosystem service markets that incentivize the farmers and ranchers to improve soil health systems that also benefit society, because we see the systems really as the foundation for building more resilient and productive ag systems, as well as protecting natural resources. The ecosystem services market grew out of conversations among leaders in agriculture and conservation, so it was specifically conceived and designed for agriculture. And it was also developed to overcome some of those past market challenges where they didn't align well with how agricultural production system and the ag industry works, as Carrie mentioned some of those things. First and foremost, this program was created to recognize and reward farmers and ranchers for their impacts and really maximizing the value that is going back to the farm. And many others were on board with this approach. If you go to the next slide, you'll see we now have over 60 member organizations from all across the ag supply chain, from commodity groups and conservation groups to a whole variety of those involved in the ag industry, aggregators and tech companies and input providers, university partners, and many others. And these members are also actively participating in the development and the testing of our market approach. So they provide a lot of insight and expertise, as well as significant on-the-ground support for our pilot projects. We're also fortunate enough to have received very generous financial support from both our members and other philanthropic funders. So the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, Walton Family Foundation, General Mills, the Nature Conservancy, NRCS, and others, and want to recognize and thank all of the organizations and members for their continuing contributions to our work. Next slide, you'll see we're going to dig into how is ESMC different. So I'm in a great position here as the last presenter to provide a little bit of just how are we different, because other presenters have covered quite a lot of the context for these markets. Primarily, ESMC is a nonprofit, right? We're mission driven, so all of the net proceeds that are generated from the credit sales go to farmers and ranchers. We don't need to generate a profit for ourselves, so really maximizing that return to the producers. Again, we're a collaborative effort. We have everyone at the table. Buyers and sellers are connected and working together to try to build and scale a market that really works to serve everyone. And these folks help guide our decisions. They provide feedback, and they really come together to work towards standardizing and making sure that we can support the market, get the protocols and the pilots certified, and then of course our members keep us honest and transparent throughout this whole process. These folks have joined us, and we are now invested with $22 million to work towards advanced quantification and verification approaches, which will reduce the costs of running this program and also reduce the burden on the producer to provide information. Much of the funding that we have currently is going into this research, development, and demonstration. We hope to learn a lot through these very focused and iterative pilot projects, doing our due diligence to address some of those challenges, and again, creating a market that not only meets the immediate needs, but really is aiming towards meeting the needs and the requirements of where these markets will be in the future. It is very much a changing space. So our pilots are designed to be very low risk, sort of in this research and development phase. We're only requiring an annual contract, and there is no penalty for withdrawing from the program in the pilot phase. So we do plan to launch our full market in late 2022, gearing up for the 2023 reporting year. How else is ESMC different? So we are systems-based and practice agnostic. Really, it's up to the producer to decide what to do, how much to do, how many changes to make, and ESMC really just pays for the outcomes of that for multiple impacts from a variety of practices that they're implementing, not just specific practices. I'll also note that we cover cropland and also grazing operations in our program. And it is done at a field by field basis. So we're not looking at the whole farm. We don't require any minimum or maximum acres. And we are very focused on science-based, outcomes-based, really robust, sophisticated models to get at the specific outcomes for the specific set of practices being implemented. Our program stacks those assets, so we actually have 4 different credits in one process. So we cover the soil carbon, which is really just the removals, what is sequestered in the soil, as well as the net greenhouse gas reductions, water quality, and water conservation. And this is really important, again, in maximizing that value that comes back to the producer and really streamlining the whole process to save, reduce the costs. So we can also generate credits for multiple markets, which is another great way to stack this and make it sort of a one-stop shop. We do corporate supply chain reporting, which you'll sometimes hear referred to as Scope 3, as well as those carbon offset and water quality compliance markets, which we often refer to as Scope 1. Another important difference to note is that we are actively working with certification bodies such as Gold Standard and Sustain Cert to get our protocols and our pilot projects certified. We really feel like that's necessary to establish that confidence in the marketplace, ensure that it's solid and standardized and really going to last into the future as some of the rules and requirements change. If you go to the next slide, ESMC also has a research arm, so Ecosystem Services Market Research Consortium, really trying to hone in on some of those challenges and issues that still need to be resolved as the market develops, really focused on reducing costs and balancing the improved quantification with the costs, streamlining the data entry and the monitoring, reporting, and verification process is really important. Really trying to reduce the burden on the farmer for reporting on all of that data. We're trying to do that through some innovative technology and remote sensing and other approaches so that we can pull in that information more easily. We're also looking to simplify the sale and the tracking of the assets and the credits. So, on the buyer side of things, also making sure that that process is easy and streamlined. We know that we need to build the interest and participation both on the sell side and the buy side. So we have to scale the program really to make it cost effective. So really trying to make sure that we are meeting the needs on both sides in order to achieve that scale. Okay, I think if you go to the next slide, we'll dive in a little bit to sort of how the ESMC market works. With producers, there's the first step of simply producer enrollment. Once they have opened an ESMC account, they'll be able to access all those categories of assets in the multiple markets. They'll provide their information, and then that gets sent over to our quantification models, so DNDC and APEX. Those are used to quantify the outcomes, again, very robust and science-based. Those modeling results and the information collected from the producer is then verified, so the assets can be generated. Once those assets are sold to one or more buyers through the marketplace, then ESMC will take out the costs that we have to cover in order to generate those assets, and then the remaining amount is paid to those producers for their outcomes. So again, sort of a one-stop shop. If you go to the next slide, a little more detail about the enrollment process. Really, we see it as sort of 2 touch points that the producer will have to have. Step 1 is simply setting up an ESMC account. At that point, they can hand it off to any advisor of their choosing to help them select their fields and support the data entry, or they can do it themselves. So click on the fields, upload a shapefile, but they can use anybody they would like to help them through that process. We don't require any specific company or any purchase of services or products. And of course, there is no cost to the producer to participate. ESMC then will take care of the field stratification and coordinate the soil sampling. Those results will just be uploaded into the producer's account. And then at that point, they don't have to do a lot other than track their information. They won't need to come back to the portal until the end of the year. They'll enter in the rest of their information or verify what's been uploaded from a third party, self-certify that information, sign their producer agreement, and then that information is submitted for asset generation. If you go to the next slide, it's really just a diagram to show the data collection options. Again, they can enter in information directly in the portal through the direct or through an advisor. They can upload information from a third party through an API, but they'll always have the option to go in and review and edit that information before it is submitted. On the next slide, you kind of take a step back and look at our overall timeline from the producer perspective. So items for the producer are in green and items in black are ESMC. The cropland crediting period goes from harvest to harvest. So as soon as harvest is over, that's when the crediting period begins. The soil sampling needs to happen within the first 6 months, so we will need to identify fields ahead of that. Again, producers will just have to keep track of their information, but they won't have to get back into the portal until following harvest at the end of the year. That's when the credit reporting period ends. They have a little bit of time to get all that information into the platform and submitted. And then after that, ESMC takes over on doing the asset quantification, the verification, certification, asset sale, and then the producer receives their payment the following year in the first or second quarter. If you go to the next slide, this is just a diagram of the stacked assets and the multiple markets that the producer will have access to. So again, soil carbon tends to be sort of a catch-all phrase. It really just refers to the soil carbon removals that are sequestered in the soil. We also see the net greenhouse gas as another valuable revenue stream to capture methane, nitrous oxide, water quality and water conservation assets as well. And then we've got two markets. We've got the scope 1, which is again the offset and compliance grade markets, as well as the scope 3 corporate supply chain markets. So we can mix and match these as well. You could do a scope 1 soil carbon greenhouse gas and a scope 3 water, or vice versa. And we'll dive in a little bit and explain how these, all of these markets are a little bit different. So when we're looking at the scenarios and the eligibility questions, it's really going to depend on the specific scope and the specific environmental attribute and what the buyers are looking for. So if you go to the next slide and take a look at that scenario that was provided, scope 1 markets are better defined. There's more rules and requirements about data and ownership requirements. It does require a practice change, and in the scenarios, the rented scenario, all 500 acres would be eligible. In the owned scenario, you've got 420 acres that would be eligible in 2021, and then those additional 80 would actually be available in 2022 based on those new practices. If you go to the next slide, you'll see quantification then is dependent on comparing that baseline scenario to the changes that are made over time. And again, you know, the models will capture not only just the practice change, but all of the implementation changes that happen alongside just one of those practices. And again, really capturing the methane and the nitrous oxide is sometimes more significant than what is captured in terms of soil carbon sequestration. If you go to the next slide, it really focuses in on scope 3. So the scope 3 market is still changing and evolving. We are working to be very flexible on the guidance and the rules of the road and coordinating with all of our members to help determine what those scope 3 pathways are going to look like. So we're actually exploring a couple of different baseline options to try to help expand what farmers can be compensated for. So we've got, site-specific baselines that can be used, also trying to use some supplemental information to set those baselines, as well as advocating for sort of a prevailing practice baseline, which would actually expand the opportunities there for producers. So really just looking to engage in the next few years as these rules and requirements change and become more standardized. We really see it as an opportunity to help guide how these markets land for producers as well as for the buyers. So I think I'll end there. Look forward to more detailed questions, and I think these slides will be shared as well, so you can dig in a little more to some of these details, but thank you.
That's right. Thank you, Caroline. And thank you to all of our presenters for the great presentations and information. I've been seeing a lot of questions come in from the audience, and we're going to shift a little bit and use the remaining time for the question and answer with our presenters. Questions will be drawn from audience submission as well as questions that were submitted through the registration process. And as Emily mentioned before, I think maybe I mentioned earlier too, we've received hundreds of questions. So we simply won't get to all of them. And I think that's important for us all to recognize. And so some topics are just simply beyond what we're even going to begin to cover today. But I don't want anybody to be discouraged, because we are going to capture all of the questions that are submitted and use that to plan future webinars and informational resources on this topic. There's also a few options for follow-up in case your particular question is not addressed that I'll share near the end, in terms of just reiterating the contact information and platforms for the different presenters. But you can also use your question bar to submit a question very specific to a presenter. So, if you really want to ask Caroline a specific question, you could type into the question bar, I'd like to ask Caroline to do this, and we'll be sure to connect the two of you and get that information relayed. So without further ado, as the presenters turn their cameras on and mics on, I'm going to share, actually, Megan, if you could go back and just kind of share the ground rules there a little bit still. I wanted to just kind of explain how this is going to work for everybody, just so that we are sure we can get through as many questions as possible and give each presenter an opportunity to respond. So it's going to be a little bit like a debate style. We're going to limit the time for each presenter to respond to a question to 1 minute. And if we get that 1 minute mark, I'll raise my hand just as a cue to the presenter that time is up, and then we'll transition to the next presenter. And just to make sure, again, everybody has an opportunity to respond. And we'll rotate through using the same order as you all presented in. So starting with Alden, Carrie, Adam, and then Caroline. And I'll rotate who starts so that the first presenter isn't always going first. So if that is clear to everybody, I think I'll go ahead with the first question there, which covers land ownership requirements. This is something I recognize that all of you touched on a little bit in your presentation, but I think really, given the high rates of rented land in the Midwest and the fact that many farmers are on a year-to-year lease, I would just like you to reiterate for us whether producers need to own the land they manage in order to participate in your program. And if not, how do they demonstrate control of that land over the term of the agreement? So Alden, I think we'll get you started off here on this question for us.
No, they don't have to own all the land. They farm. They, in fact, all of the projects we've registered to date include a combination of owned and leased land. They do have to prove that others with ownership interests in the fields and field sets have assigned them the authority to register the Nori project and control the disposition and pricing of the credits that are generated. And unfortunately, the wording that goes into such an assignment agreement is different in every state. We help by sharing an example of an assignment agreement that works in certain states, and we try to get those who are working with us who have put assignment agreements in place to send blacked out versions to us so that we will accumulate an example for every state to share with everybody. But there's a one-page document you got to put in place so that you've got permission from the landowner to do this.
Great. Carrie, do you want to touch on how that works for Indigo?
Yes. So again, you do not need to own your land. You can rent or own. We do ask that you are able to demonstrate control over the land during the contract period. The contract is a 5-year period. We don't ask for a lease. We don't ask for a written document, but the expectation is that you should have at least an agreement with your landowner such that if we did request you to confirm that you and your landowner would be able to confirm that you expect to have control over that land for the contract period.
Thank you. Adam, would you like to go next?
Similar for us. Yeah, you don't need to own the land. You can rent the land as well. We just ask that you have decision-making power over the operations that occur on that land for the term of the contract. And as I mentioned, right now we're operating on 1-year terms with renewal. So that, as you mentioned, aligns with a lot of the farm lease agreements that are in place in Iowa and other states currently.
And Caroline, what does this look like for ESMC programs?
Yeah, very similar. They do not need to own the land. They will need to have rights to the assets that are generated. And just to note that it's a little bit different for Scope 1 versus Scope 3. Scope 1 always being a little more detailed in the sort of proof that would be required for the assets. Scope 3 assets are more tied to the product and not so much the land ownership. So an agreement with the landowner is sufficient.
Great. So I guess, just a follow-up is, can you give us any real world examples of maybe where this just couldn't work for a farmer? Or have you seen that, if your agreement is a 5-year or 10-year period and they just simply can't get the landowner's commitment to that? Have you run into that at all? Anyone? I'll just open that for anybody. Yes.
To tell you the truth, probably that's been the single largest blocker in getting projects enrolled in our marketplace. And the thing that is consistent so far is the owner that turns out to be difficult to get an agreement with is almost always a surprise for the producer. So it wouldn't be so much of a blocker if it was predictable, but so far it's not predictable. We let farmers split out acres where that permission is not available and register them separately, giving them an opportunity to take time to get agreement or assignment of authority in place. But we won't issue credits to them unless and until that authority is in place. And I would also say we do not ask to see the authority, so there will be confidential terms in those authorities that we don't see, but we require our verifier to give us assurance that the assignments are in place.
And anyone else? I'll just, Adam, you mentioned you're year to year, so I doubt if this is too much of a challenge for you. Carrie or Caroline, have you any real world examples or additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the one thing that I'll add is it hasn't been a huge problem for us yet since we are in our first year. But what I would say is if a grower is having trouble getting that agreement with their landowner, or if they are on a shorter term lease, it's a 1-year lease and you're not sure that you'll be there next year, we would be prepared to explore how we can help, adjust things and work with the landowner directly if that's what it took to kind of, figure out a solution for the longer term. I see it as just one of the challenges that we will all have to solve. And so, we are very glad to help partner with our farmers to get that done.
Could I just add one thing? The blocker, Jean, is in the Nori marketplace. If you sell your credit, we're asking you to update your operating data reporting for 10 years after the credit sale. And that's the place where landowners are hesitant, and unreasonably so. We get that, so we try to be helpful. If you were to register your project directly in the Climate Action Registry marketplace, you're asking that landowner to agree to meet reporting and verification requirements for 100 years. It's a different block.
Sure. Caroline or Adam, any last thing on that topic, or I'll go to the next question?
Yep. Great.
Okay. So another common scenario is for farmers to be part of some sort of NRCS or state-funded program, like CSP, EQIP. EQIP is really well designed for farmers who are kind of in that experimental phase and they want to maybe try cover crops or reduce tillage for a few years. So just really trying to tease out again whether these acres then are eligible to be enrolled into your program. And I think, Carrie, you're up first on this one.
Yes, they are. We have designed our program so that these complementary programs can be pursued at the same time. The only exceptions that we will make is for programs like CRP and WRP. Those kinds of land uses are not able to join the program, but CSP and EQIP are very good to go. The only exception is if you are getting paid for a carbon asset. If you are selling a carbon credit in a different program, you cannot have that same plot of land in our program. But I will draw the distinction as well. I know there's a lot of talk of a carbon bank and other policies that may be coming with the new administration. So I will distinguish between selling the carbon asset versus financing of the carbon asset. Financing programs are good, and anything else that does not actually sell the carbon asset. So the vast majority of those programs.
Adam, how does this work with soil and water?
Yeah, we don't currently allow stacking with programs like EQIP or CSP, or in the case of some state-based conservation programs. And the main reason that we don't do that is some of our customers are those same agencies. So we don't want to double commit a government dollar twice to the same acre. So just a blanket no-go for us. With the caveat, as Carrie mentioned, we don't know where some of these new federal programs and policies will go. So I don't want to say that that's the way it's going to be in the future, but that's the way it is today.
Sure. And just to add on to that, policy questions was one of that buckets that we just wanted to kind of put aside today because there's so much movement in there and lack of clarity in where things will land. So probably people will have some policy related questions that they've submitted, and we'll have to address those another time. Caroline, your response to the overlapping of federal state programs with ESMC.
Yep, so producers are still eligible for our program, even if they're participating in an NRCS or a state-funded program. We also only exclude participation in another market program when they're getting paid for their assets. But any program that's not a market program, we see as complementary. In fact, really, it's our vision to be very complementary with any other sort of incentive program that's out there. Adding our piece to catalyze the change.
We at Nori are similar to Caroline. We exercise a bit of discipline. We differentiate between stacking and double crediting or double claiming a credit. And we do allow CRP, CSP, EQIP projects to enroll in our marketplace, particularly CRP, where over the last 5 years, 25% of all acres under CRP have been taken out of CRP. So we think it needs that extra support to be sustained. But we also only say yes with the approval of the federal or state funding agency. So, for example, we have asked for and received written approval from the California Air Resources Board to allow Healthy Soils Initiative subsidized projects to enroll in our marketplace, and we would not allow them to enroll if we had not first received the written approval of the state regulator.
Great. I think, you know, one of the questions that we hear all the time, and I think it's a little bit of a sticking point for the farmers who've been doing this stuff for years. You know, they've been doing no-till for decades, they've been doing cover crops for decades, and now suddenly there's this appearance of great incentives and resources for people who are willing to move to that. So is there a way for markets generally, but obviously speaking to your own program as well, is there a way for your program to compensate farmers who've been using these conservation practices for years? And Adam, you're up for this one first.
Great. This is the $1 million question, and I'm glad I drew the short straw to go first on this. So thank you. Yeah, this for us, it's really customer driven. So it's our partners who are purchasing our outcomes who are driving us to this no look back period. So I guess until the demand side changes a bit, we at least are going to have to stick to that no look back period through our program. But I'm hopeful, and this is where I think some of the policy advancements will mature, especially under this administration, to reward farmers that have been doing things for a while that may not be eligible for our programs. The other thing that we could encourage too is enrolling in the acres that aren't. In the case of the scenario that we talked about, those 80 acres, you know, perhaps there's other programs out there through groups like Practical Farmers or other programs where we could work together to put a package together that accounts for both historical work as well as new work. And I think there's opportunities for that kind of collaboration to make a seamless package for a farmer that both is backward looking, but also really encouraging change and looking forward. So that's something that I think we'll work on, is developing out programs that are kind of complementary in terms of looking at all their acres rather than just the new acres. But right now we're just new acres.
How about you, Caroline?
Yeah, so you know, similarly in our case, it really depends on which environmental attribute we're looking at, and then of course which level of market we're looking at. Scope 1, absolutely not. That's, you know, pretty clear on that. For supply chain reporting in the Scope 3 markets, we're really trying to explore some expanded options that would modify the baseline to capture more of what has happened previously, but we do not do a look back at this point. I'll note too that with some of those situations, you know, because we are outcomes based, if there's sort of a minimal change that's happening, that will impact the value of the asset. So even if we try to do a bit of a look back. But in advocating for those modified baselines, that's, you know, an opportunity that we're pursuing as we work through our certification. I will note too that the water quality improvements and the greenhouse gas reductions, those happen annually. It's a little bit different for the soil carbon where it's sort of a long-term benefit. So with those annual improvements, being able to capture that change every year actually provides a little more value for the producers as well.
Thanks. Alden, do you want to address this from Nori's perspective?
Yeah, we're really conflicted on this because, you know, everything in our bones wants us to find a way to reward those amazing early adopters. But when we looked at the experience of the leading established carbon registries, Verra and CAR, we saw two things. In the carbon markets, a credit has a vintage year, which is the year that the carbon you sequestered was supposed to have been drawn down. And in those markets to date, there's been a 3.5 to 5 year lag between the issuance of a credit and its vintage date. And in those markets, 38 to 48% of all of the credits that have ever been listed have never been bought. And we went to the marketplace and the buyers are saying, we don't buy old vintage stuff. So we thought, how do we fix that? And we met with a lot of friendly potential buyers and reached a trade-off. And we agreed that we will issue up to 5 years of older vintage credits in response to practice changes that happened after December 31st, 2009. And that's an arbitrary trade-off, but we couldn't find we couldn't get secure that we'd have buyers for older vintage credits than that, and we did not want to encourage farmers to think they're going to make revenue on credits they can't sell.
How about Carrie?
Yes, so we have a very short look back period. It goes back 2 years. We launched the Indigo Carbon program in 2019. So our look back, we have growers who are in now. Those who signed up in 2019 and want to get paid for the changes that they made that year. So since harvest of 18 is what is included. But I think there's an important distinction to make between, a couple of year look back period and the grower who's been no-tilling for 10, 15 years. Right? That's different, or cover cropping, or fully regen. There are some cases of growers who really have kind of gone whole hog over the last few decades, and those are the great examples, right? Those are the growers who have shown us that this can work. And something that we really think about at Indigo is a carbon credit is one product here, right? And that's where this conversation is focused, and that's where we are focused in producing to start. But we also start thinking about those growers who are producing grain regeneratively or otherwise sustainably, and there is a market for that. There is value in identity preserved grain, and there is value in being able to service what I think is a broadening understanding at the consumer level of what they are buying and from where and how it's made. So we aren't talking about it today, but the other half of the Indigo business is a grain marketplace. So it's our vision that over time we are able to find, it won't be carbon credits per se, because that's not how they're defined, but there could be other opportunities for those growers to benefit from the shift toward adding these beneficial farming practices.
So, and let me just kind of play devil's advocate, and maybe Adam, this is back to you for the short straw here. Let's say a farmer's been doing this and then they're like, I really want to get in this marketplace. I'm just going to skip cover crops for a year. I'm going to go get my neighbor to plow up the fields. How does that play into this whole piece?
Yeah, I can't speak for others, but they'll have their chance to go. For us, it's really looking back using available data and technology. There's plenty of remote sensing data available that looks back historically, at least for the past couple of years. So doing some random audits of the farms that are enrolled is good practice, just to ensure we're still meeting that additionality check that we put in place. So the technology exists to verify that these applications are true. So I wouldn't encourage that. I think that there's ways that we'll figure it out.
Good to know. Good to know. Anybody have anything to add to what Adam said there? I think he addressed it really well. Alden,
Yeah, we totally agree. And our verification protocol requires the verifier to provide us assurance that they didn't do that. And given the availability of data and satellite images, we're finding it not hard at all to get that assurance. It's not a big cost component of the verification exercise at all.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that, it really benefits the producer to keep those sorts of practices in place in the long term. So a little bit they'd be shooting themselves in the foot to go and till it up.
All right. So I'm going to shift a little bit then, kind of looking outside. We sent you that farmer scenario, or that hypothetical farmer, really based on a corn soybean row crop rotation, and really that's what we've been focused on. We asked you to focus on that, but we all know that agriculture is diverse. And I'm hoping each of you can talk a little bit about opportunities for things that are not corn and soybean related. So things like perennial grazing, silvopasture, alternative crop rotations, even kind of edge of field practices. And if we want to kind of bucket them up, maybe we'll look at kind of grazing and silvopasture first. And I think, Caroline, you're up first on that.
Yeah, great. So I can really answer those all at once. Our goal is really to maximize any value that we can bring back to the producer. So to the extent possible, expanding all of the practices that could be included. And we have intentionally chosen, very robust models. So the DMDC model and the APEX model that are capable of capturing as many of those practices and sort of the dynamic nature of those system approaches And much of our research is actually trying to expand additional practices. So we do include grazing, whether it's part of a cropland system or whether it's, rangeland exclusively. We are working to add additional edge of field practices to the Apex model, making sure that we capture those. And then we do include crop rotations as well in the model. So it's a priority really for our work.
Excellent. Alden.
We're comfortable that the soil sample testing informed process model that we're working with, which is NRCS's Gidget, which is a Comet Farm, gives us enough to get started. And when we're talking crop rotations, cover cropping, in not every region of the United States, but most. The two areas where we're not comfortable that any of the process models out there are adequate to get us started are grazing livestock production and rice production. And we are about a year into working with some third parties and academics to try to get a grazing lands methodology out in the public domain for consideration, and then we'll follow with similar efforts in rice production. The thing that's important here is we're running a market, so we have to be entirely independent of that operator and owner of the process model that we rely on. So we're doing a little herding cats here, but I think it's going really well on grazing lands, and hopefully it will go quicker later on rice.
Excellent. Carrie, how does Indigo Ag look at these kind of alternative or different practice out of the box, or out of Illinois, I guess? There's a lot of corn and soybean in Illinois, but that's certainly not all of agriculture. And even within Illinois, there's pockets of diversity.
Yeah, so this is a great question. And with science and technology and research and experimentation at the core of what we do, it's something that's really important for us. So I've actually asked Ryan Stockwell from our team to add a little bit more detail. Ryan, if you could just introduce yourself briefly, that'd be great.
Yeah, hey everybody. Ryan Stockwell, I'm Senior Ag Partnership Manager with Indigo, working with Carrie and the rest of the team on developing this market. So yeah, if I could just provide a little more detail on that. So we are in the process of getting the grazing methodology. So I would simply say, when it comes to grazing, stay tuned. That's progress. And I guess one other thing to add, Jean, you had mentioned and we know that, yeah, for the most part we're talking 400 acres. There are groups that add other crops, small grains.
Ryan, I'm sorry to interject. Your audio is a little bit choppy there. Not sure. Maybe just turn your video off. Even that might help for the clarity of what you're saying. Try that.
I'll give that a shot. Otherwise, if it's still choppy, finish for me.
Hey, Ryan, it is still a bit choppy. If you don't mind, I'll give the summary version, which is all of these other kinds of practices are on our radar. We are actively doing research and field experiments in a variety of these, and looking at the potential sequestration impact across the board. So we don't have many of them in today. Things like silvopasture are not in the protocol today, but we expect to be able to get there in the future.
Did everybody have a chance? I kind of lost track of who went first on there. Adam, thank you, keeping me in line.
Yeah, I'll make it quick and also address the edge of field practices. So starting with what's eligible, so long as we're able to model it and it produces the outcomes, it's eligible. So for example, this year we had, or last year actually, we had farmers enroll extended crop rotations through the addition of small grains. Also had some extended crop rotations with alfalfa added to a longer term rotation. We can do some work with grazing, so that is an opportunity. Especially if you're adding livestock to a cover crop system for grazing, that is definitely eligible as well. But yeah, we're focused on outcomes. So how we can work with farmers to produce those outcomes is really in their hands to make that decision about what works best. This isn't a cover crop program. It's not a no-till program. It's an outcome program. So as long as we're producing those outcomes, we're in business. Regarding edge of field practices, that's a little more difficult. Many of those practices, or some of them at least, don't produce carbon outcomes. Some might be more water quality focused. So kind of finding the multiple benefits of edge of field practices presents a bit of a challenge when you're looking at a marketplace solution. The other challenge is the cost of edge of field practices in terms of design, engineering, construction, and operation. That really is, in many cases, better suited for a cost share or incentive program, not necessarily a market program. But again, there may be opportunities through other programs to stack things together.
So I wanted to, one thing I heard all of you say was outcomes, and looking at some new models to figure out how these different crop systems can create some outcomes or what the outcomes might be. So I guess here's a question just that came in, just for clarification. Can you all, and we can use the same order again, because this is all kind of the same question bucket, starting with Caroline. Can you please review again if payments are based on actual in-field measurements or results, or whether you are basing your payments on a model expected results?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the soil carbon sequestration, we do a sampling at the beginning. So we do have one measurement that sort of sets the carbon stock baseline. For all of the other outcomes, they are based on models. So we aren't out there, measuring water quality specifically. We do that soil carbon sample. And then that estimate goes out using the model for 5 years. And then the payments are based on the model results. We do have a true up too at 5 years. Right now we're in a pilot phase, so we're not going out that far, but at 5 years, we'll do another soil carbon sample, true up the actual outcome.
How about Alden with Nori?
We sort of like to say, don't think in terms of soil sampling and testing versus process models. We want to work with process models that are informed by robustly, continuously maintained, statistically representative soil sampling and testing exercises. So we are working with a lot of parties, helping to set up new networks of statistically representative sites, so that we're not asking people to do soil sampling and testing in every field. And there's a reason for that. And that is, even if you're doing impeccable soil sampling and testing, the uncertainties associated with two estimates 5 years apart are so large that if you rely on those results, you could be overissuing credits by 80%. So we need to have both, and we're working at introducing a efficient way to have both.
Carrie, do you want to add Indigo Ag?
Yes, so I'll start by just clarifying, in case I know everyone here is starting in very different points of familiarity and understanding of how these markets work. So I'll start by saying models are good because it is very scalable and it's cost effective to do, right? So it means it doesn't cost us as much to produce a credit if we use a model. Sample is good because it means it's much more accurate. You know exactly what is the reality in a field when you're pulling directly from the soil. So in our program, we use a combination of both because we want to make sure we have as high of accuracy as we can, but we want to keep those costs low, and not for us, but because that means we can pass more of that credit value back to the grower. So we use a hybrid version, and we have a team of statisticians who work to make sure we are optimally sampling such that we are representing our entire population. And when you have millions of acres, it means that you can more accurately train your models using those soil samples. So again, science and technology is really at the core here, and trying to drive the best outcomes for the lowest cost to produce for the greatest benefit for the grower. And we do account for both greenhouse gas emissions that were abated, so methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, as well as carbon sequestration using this approach.
Great. Adam, I'll give you the last point on this.
Yep, so our outcome payment is based on the model. We do sampling of both water and soil over time, which we hope will help perfect the models as they grow and hopefully improve. Also, another kind of safeguard that we have in is we don't sell all of the outcomes that are produced either. We have some buffer pools on the carbon side, and on the water side, we have some limits as far as reductions that we think are necessary just to keep the models a little bit in check in case there's some wonky numbers coming out. So we have a few checks in place to have some assurance with our customers that we're not overestimating the production.
Great. So our next question, we're going to shift a little bit again from a farmer perspective and the fact that, all of these are based on a model and an outcome and anticipated things, but what we're expecting our outcomes to be is based on what our plan is. And sometimes the best plan just goes out the window, right? The weather messes with your plans, you can't get your cover crop planted on time, whatever. So could farmers ever find themselves in a situation where the outcomes aren't where they're supposed to be, and maybe they're facing a return payment, or they have to even, or reduce payment, or maybe they even have to return a payment or some sort of penalty? Could you talk, we'll start with Alden on this one. Could you explain how your program adapts to the real world challenges?
First of all, one NRT, which is our credit, represents an incremental ton drawn out of the atmosphere with the recovered carbon retained, and the landowner's commitment that they will make best efforts to retain the new carbon stock level for 10 years. If over that, and there's a force majeure clause in our contract, and if that carbon's lost due to natural events, we, Nori, have to go to the market, buy and retire an NRT to keep the commitment to the buyer whole. If the landowner voluntarily elects to release the carbon over that 10-year period, we will replace the NRT, backing our commitment to the buyer, and may or may not ask the buyer to pay us for our cost of doing so. The force majeure clause is very broad in that they are not held liable for losses that are due to extreme weather events, nor for example, plowing or land management activity that is a reasonable farmer response after an extreme weather event.
In the Indigo case, we do not claw back money from growers. We have designed our program to help manage risk as we go, and we have a large portfolio, so we're able to account for small puts and takes here and there, understanding that nothing ever goes exactly as planned. And we expect that, a grower who's got 10, 20, 30, 40 fields in our program is surely at some point going to see a reversal on a short-term basis on one or more of those fields. And so the way that it works is we do track at the field level. So if there is a moment where, you had to till or something else came up, right, that you couldn't control, or you made the decision in the short-term basis to actually take that action, right, which could short-term reverse, we don't claw anything back. We have a vesting schedule in our 5-year contract. And the reason that 5-year contract exists is to help protect for these kinds of things and smooth it over time. So we won't take any money back. We'll pause your payments just on that field while you bring that field back up to the level of performance it was already at. And once you get back there, we'll just resume those payments over time. So hopefully it's a way that, when there's already a difficult situation for a grower, we're helping to make it a little bit easier, not harder.
Yep, we're a little bit similar. Obviously, if the farmer did something intentional, like not planting a cover crop, there wouldn't be a payment for that field or fields that didn't comply with the terms of the contract. There's another category of events that are more out of farmers' control. Say if weather prevented cover crops from growing to the anticipated level of growth. That's where the models and the long-term kind of averages come into play. So in those cases, we don't, withhold payment from the farmer, but if it was intentional in nature, that would be a scenario where we'd look to, not make payment for that particular year.
Yeah, and we are very similar. We wouldn't ask producers to return a payment or have to pay a penalty. The payments are made at the end of the year after the asset generation and verification is completed. So if a practice can't be implemented or something like tillage happens on the field, that would just be reflected in the outcomes from the modeling and reduce the payment for the year. We are looking at a similar sort of hold back on a percentage of that payment for the soil carbon too, to kind of modify some of those challenges. We're in a pilot phase right now, so we just have annual agreements at this point. So, you know, it's really less of an issue in the next couple of years for us. And producers are able to drop out of the pilot program at any time without any sort of penalty.
Great. So real quickly, I have 2 questions left, and I want to make sure we get through them. The first one just kind of deals with what can sometimes be another hurdle for farmers is records and paperwork involved. And so how often does a producer need to report management practices or tracking what they're doing? And what system is in place to make that as easy and painless for them as possible? And I think is Adam up first on this one? No, Carrie, you're up first on this one, I think. I don't know.
I'm happy to share. It's okay. Adam, you can take one of my turns if you would like. It's fine. We have a software platform that helps you provide that management record information. It happens once a year, just like harvesting any other crop. I mentioned in my presentation, we think of it as a digital harvest, right? So it's a time when you've got to sit down and collect your records and submit them through our software. And we're constantly adding tools and improvements to that software and other technologies that we can layer on to ease the burden of that data, because it is a good amount of data that's required for this. And this links back to producing a quality product that buyers will want to buy and pay high prices for. So it is centered in our software product, and we will continue expanding that in the years to come.
Now we'll go to Adam.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, similar. We've got a data platform that farmers enter data when they enroll, and then once a year they need to verify that things are accurate and add future years data on a rolling 2-year cycle. So also we're working on APIs with other data platforms to streamline the data entry process. So if farmers have data in another platform through a retailer or other program, we're looking to make it easy for them to transfer field boundaries and data over to us. So that's advancements that are being made currently, but yeah, we've got an online system that farmers can manage their operational data pretty easily.
Yeah, and ESMC is very similar. We have a producer portal. Producers are asked to enter their information once a year. At the end of the year, we also allow them to add access for any advisor that they would like to have do that work for them or help them through that process. We are also building APIs to other third-party platforms, so you know they can pull in the information that they have available in those platforms, fill in the missing pieces to get that done. We have it also set up so that in subsequent years, it'll all be pre-populated. They really just need to go in and make some changes based on, you know, what's different from the prior years. We are also really exploring, you know, what are some of the remote sensing tools that we can use to get at some of those questions and not have to ask the producers directly, both for the reporting as well as the verification component.
And Alden, Nori's platform for records.
More of same. For each field in the United States, anybody can anonymously for free set up an account in Nori and access an initial data template that is pre-filled. We use it something called smart defaults. And so it's initially looks like quite a big data ask, but we're just asking the farmers to confirm and correct where they see mistakes. They have to update annually. They have to verify their updates at least once every 3 years, that they're starting with a pre-filled template in the first place. With respect to APIs, we are at different stages of working at this point in time with 7 different major other entities that they already supply data to, so that they can automatically instruct those other entities to transfer data across to us if they feel like it. And we hope to be completely technology agnostic and have those data transferability capacities in place with everybody who wants to put it in place with us.
Great. So my last question, and I'll let Adam go first on this one. You guys are doing a much better job keeping track of the order than I am. And maybe just kind of in 30 seconds, if you can, just what closing remarks do you have for the audience before we wrap up today's webinar?
Well, I'll kind of speak to the farmers who are still on the line. You know, there's a lot coming at you fast, right, with all these things. And, you know, patience, I guess, maybe ask for patience with farmers as we all grow through this new world a little bit together. But I think, you know, I hope that some of the unique aspects of all of our programs kind of came out through this presentation. But, you know, I think the value here is that, you know, there's multiple ecosystem service potential revenue sources on a farm. And I want to make sure that farmers understand that they have that at their disposal if they choose to make the practice changes that can produce those outcomes. So hopefully there's more to come. Hopefully we all mature in this space together and opportunities continue to grow. And like Carrie said, hopefully the price of carbon goes up and we can do some really good things for farmers.
Caroline?
Yeah, great. Just thank you for everybody for participating and engaging. It's been great to hear from the other presenters. Really excited to see the amount of interest in this work by the number of participants that are participating. And I'll just echo Adam's comments. It is sometimes confusing, and we know that the space is really still evolving, particularly on the supply chain reporting markets. But we're seeing a lot of momentum, and I think I'm very optimistic that we can work collaboratively, learn a lot from what all of us are doing, and really make sure that we set up a successful marketplace. Meets the needs of the buyers and really provides that incentive for the producers to improve their systems for a number of reasons. You know, it's just good practice, and we'd like to compensate them for that. Also wanted to say thanks to the team and the ISAP folks. They did a great job on the webinar, a lot of planning. So thank you very much for hosting.
I appreciate that. Alden, final thoughts from Nori?
I just want Rebecca to turn on her camera so people can see Rebecca. Anybody who wants to learn more, Rebecca's your agronomist in Nori, who's your head of support, an amazing support team. So this is who you rely on for hand-holding and great information. I'm not the one, and she's amazing. So if you want to learn more, call. And if we get sort of a critical mass of farmers who want to learn more, then Rebecca gets online, walks you through the template, and answers all your questions, and she's amazing. Great.
Thank you. And Carrie, I guess the last parting words goes to you then.
Well, thanks. I will start by saying thank you to everybody on the panel and to everybody who has been listening in. I will also echo that there's a lot of information. It is confusing to a lot of people who are just new. So, you know, ask questions. I hope that everybody sees us as your advocates. We really are in this to, you know, there are climate impacts that we are trying to achieve to service our buyers, but we want to do that in a way that builds and reinvigorates and really gives back to our farming communities, to our farmers, to our farming families. This is at the core of everything that we do. So if you have more questions, that's right where you should be. And we'd encourage you to get involved soon. You know, the best way to do it is to dive in and start having more conversations. So we hope to see many of you around our platform very soon. And thanks again for having us.
Well, thank you again to all of our presenters and to Emily, my co-host and colleagues working behind the scenes today during today's event. And gratitude again to partners from the neighboring states that really helped put today's webinar together. Just wanted to share a few points as we wrap up. As you leave today's webinar, a window will open up in your browser with a survey that will take you about 3 minutes to complete. So we really appreciate your feedback and hope that you will answer those questions for us. We also invite you to check out ISAP's website for the resource document highlighted by Emily earlier. the video recording of this webinar will be posted there later today, along with a link for the CEU request form, and that is ilsustainableag.org. And if you just add /ecomarkets at the end there, you'll find all of the important information from today's event. If you add /events, you're going to find a calendar of events where we'll include information on future webinars, future field days when we can all get back in person again throughout the Midwest. And this will include events hosted by the partners who helped put today's event together, but also just an invitation for people listening. If there's an event that is relevant to this topic, you can send it our way and we will be happy to include it on our calendar. Next week, Tuesday, you'll receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinar with the links and all the information that I just shared. And then lastly, on this slide, you see the websites of the 4 programs featured today. I encourage you to get more information. Go to the next slide. For CCAs or anybody seeking continuing education credits, the QR code is displayed on your screen. You can use the app, but if you don't have the app, you can request those credits using a form that is linked from ISAP's website, ilsustainableag.org/ecomarkets. And that follow-up link will also be in that email you'll receive on February 16th. And lastly, there's more to come. You know, the registration and attendance number for this event really shows there's interest in this information, and we've already started putting together a topic list for future webinars to be held this summer. Looks like we're gonna need 3-part series to tackle everything, and we hope that you will join us and stay tuned for that. So thank you again for joining us today. I hope you found today's discussion interesting, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.